Loud and Quiet presents Midnight Chats.
Welcome to Midnight Chats, and thank you to everybody that got in touch with kind comments after the last podcast with Ashley Walters. It's definitely one of my favourites of the series so far. He was a really interesting guy to meet. We got on quite well, I think, even though we're very, very different people. But I think it made for a really engrossing listen. So thanks for those people that did get in touch and said they enjoyed it. And also, if you haven't listened back to it, please do go and check it out. That's episode 14 of Midnight Chats. I also really enjoyed this one, but for different reasons. So far on the series, what we've tended to do is just interview maybe one, possibly two people at a time, because we always thought that with a fewer voices you kind of get a more kind of intimate conversation. But for this one we made an exception because we had all three members of the band Sweatshop Boys come in and have a chat to us. If you're not familiar with Sweatshop Boys, they're Riz, Heems and Tom, also known as Redinho, producer. And I think maybe the most interesting thing for me about this one was just, you'll be able to hear it in the podcast, is just observing the relationship between all three of them. They only started making music together a couple of years ago, and they're very different people. Heems is a rapper from Queens, New York. Riz is rapper and actor from Wembley, North London, and Redinho, producer, also from London. And what I found really interesting was the dynamic between them, just really authentic. I mean, there's bits in the podcast where they're sort of, they're sarcastic, they're funny, they're sort of argumentative, they're intelligent. I'm really engaging guys, and I thought it was just a really interesting listen. In terms of the background, if you're not familiar with those names, Riz Ahmed is an actor and a rapper. He put out his first music about 10 years ago. He had a record called Post 9/11 Blues, and has gone on to make mixtapes, and he put out one called English Stan a couple of years ago. He's also an actor, so you'll have seen him in Four Lions, the Chris Morris film. You will have seen him in Nightcrawler with Jake Gyllenhaal a couple of years back, and also he's part of the Star Wars Rogue One movie that's coming out soon. Heems, rapper from Queens, New York, was part of the group Das Racist, and Redinho, producer from London, who's also put out a debut album a couple of years ago. They've got together and made this group, Sweatshop Boys. They're all from kind of different parts of the world and from different backgrounds. I think it really works. It brings out something that's really interesting. We covered a lot of ground. It was interesting here, Riz kind of reminisce on his rap battles that he used to get involved with when he lived in London sort of a decade ago. We talked about role models, their role models growing up, but also whether there was a lack of role models for certain people from different parts of society. And we also talked about the differences in communities in the Indian and the Pakistani communities in the UK versus the US and their observations on that. And we also talked about whether there'd be more music from Sweatshop Boys beyond their recent debut album Cashmere. So I hope you enjoy our conversation. Like I said, Sweatshop Boys came into our office in East London a little while ago, just before Halloween, to record this episode. This is episode 15 of Midnight Chats with Sweatshop Boys. Sweatshop Boys, welcome to our podcast series, Midnight Chats. It's a pleasure to have you with us. How are you all doing?
Good, thank you. We just had some Turkish food.
Excellent. How was it?
It's good.
Were you local?
Yeah. It was local, it was walking distance.
270 Heath Cambridge Road.
Incredible. This is what Heems does. He sometimes I always feel like Heems isn't listening to anything. I mean, famously, he doesn't listen, he finishes.
Yeah.
That's a direct quote from a studio session. But
it's also how he conducts his relationships.
Yeah.
Yes. but he is listening. He's deceptive, and then he'll just a nugget will come out like that, and you go, "Wow, he was conscious then."
Good at remembering numbers. It's kind of my thing, and like directional stuff. I've been showing these boys around town here in London.
It's a fascinating city.
You guys have been getting a lot of sushi when we eat. Yeah, I'm more of like a noodleman. Noodle man, if you will.
Noodle
Man.
Oh wow, that's a rap alias. I feel like that's the rap alias. Yeah,
Rap alias Noodleman. That's definitely.
Can I say that I feel like that is the alias that Heems would assign me, because I'm like the guy that's going like, no, guys, we can't use fireworks in the music video unless we've got a pyrotechnic trained handler there. I don't want a liability on the. Because I'm trying to like make sure no one dies mainly,
and I like want people to die. Yes. Like, to me, the idea of success for a video shoot is how many heads have we blown off. Like,
if it's not a massacre, he's furious.
Yeah.
See, I'm the only one that could settle any liability that would come to us in the court.
He's
so
a rapper and our lawyer, so that's been cool.
I was going to say, is that the dynamic? You're the guy that's just keeping everybody in check.
I think that, though that may be the case, I think it's important that people recognise that, objectively speaking, I'm cooler than the other people.
Riz is generally more making sure things go right. I pop up occasionally, and like there's certain things where I'll get really like passionate about, motivated, and then I'll disappear for like a week and a half. And then I'll pop up and be like, why isn't this the way I want?
It depends what context, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because if it's like, you had to get a band together for a live show yesterday.
And I did nothing. That was mainly Tom did it all.
Yeah, that was Tom. Well, we did this Radio 1 live lounge session yesterday, and Tom and I kind of like to find ways to complicate life for ourselves, just because we're not good at sitting still. And so, but in this case, actually,
we're doing a good job now.
Yeah, Tom basically pulled together this amazing live set with a sitar and tabla, playing music from Cashmere, but incorporating traditional Indian classical instruments and stuff.
Whilst you've been in London, what kind of stuff have you been up to? Because you're going to be making a video as well, aren't you?
We've got to sit down and kind of sort out lots of like band admin-y stuff that piles up when you have people living across often 3 time zones. And then we're shooting this music video.
What's the plan for that?
Just trying to play with things we've seen, but put our touch on it, in a sense. Not too different from the music, in a sense, where it is rap music, but we're trying to paint it a different color, if you will.
I saw you guys were looking for fans to get involved as well. So what are you looking for?
Whoa!
Fans are cheaper than actual actors. So that's all that is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we wanted to kind of take on, the visuals and the trappings of the traditional kind of rap video, really, but just repopulate it with people like us. Because I think something that was interesting to me going over to the States when I first started going out there for work and met Heems, and that's how Sweat Boys was formed. Actually, I was out there researching it for an acting role. Is to see that the South Asian community over there, Indians and Pakistanis, are often it's a bit more of a middle class experience than it is over here. And the community that I would spot over there that felt more like what it's like to be Asian in the UK was like the Latinos in the US. It's in terms of their socioeconomic position and their kind of, instrumental in actually building the country that they're now in, but still somehow kind of culturally unassimilable or seen as such. And so I kind of like wanted to particularly expose America to the idea that like the brown experience can be often quite a like hood experience in the UK, and so we just want to reflect the reality of that.
This is so because of the way the immigration worked to America. South Asians weren't really allowed there until like 65, and for the first 10 years they mostly brought over PhDs and masters in sciences and math because the Cold War was going on and they wanted to compete with Russia's science program. So the way that immigration occurred was at first very much like selected people by immigration services. Then after 75 until like 91, there was a Family Reunification Act. So I kind of disagree with this, that South Asians on the whole aren't more middle or upper class than South Asians in the UK. Right. But what it is that the narrative is controlled by those upper class South Asians in America. So it's mostly everybody being like, oh, we're all doctors and startup people. And then that plays into the perception of South Asians in America. But what I like to do, the reason I rap and don't write like literature in a sense is because there are working class South Asians, and it's those stories that I'm telling and trying to kind of reclaim the narrative of. And so there are tons of gas station employees, Uber drivers, taxi drivers, and people in stores. But it's just in a sense not just a marginalization of like they're marginalized, so you don't see them as much, but also people associate marginalization more in America with Black and Latinos, and so you don't consider that Bangladeshi, Chinese, and Indian and Pakistani people are also working class. That's literally what this project is about for me, is reclaiming that narrative. But I wouldn't say on the whole South Asians are more well off in America. That's kind of a generalization.
It is, but I mean the stats I've seen, particularly about Muslims of immigrant background, I think it's different with like Black Muslims in America than South Asian Muslims, but like Pakistanis and Bangladeshis in the US and like Middle Eastern people of Muslim background whose parents or they themselves have immigrated, they on average, the stat is something like they earn 30% more than, or 30. I've forgotten. I remember it was the Islamic Society of North American conference that I went to, or some literature I was reading there. Whereas like Pakistanis and Bangladeshis in the UK are at the very bottom in terms of life expectancy, employment, education. It is different, but of course I'm generalizing. And Himanshu's background itself speaks to the fact that there's of course
my dad drove a cab. My mom
Exactly.
bagged groceries at a Sainsbury Tesco equivalent in New York, Pathmark, for a long time. My mom was the only one in our whole family to ever get like a master's in economics, but then came to America and worked at a grocery store and things like that. Yeah,
I was interested to know because growing up in Wembley, northwest London, Southall area, right?
Wembley,
Yeah.
Wembley, Greenford, Harrow.
And growing up in Queens, like when you first met, what were the kind of like parallels that you could draw? Because you've obviously discussed the kind of some of the differences there, but what were the things that you felt like you had like common experience of?
I don't know. The people in Southall speak differently than us people in Queens. For one, that's it. Yeah. But Riz?
I mean, yeah, there are differences. Also, I mean, probably the communities themselves are like quite similar, particularly if you're talking about North Indian and Pakistani culture. Very, very similar. I mean, Heems was saying before that you probably have more in common culturally with a Pakistani like me than you would with a South Indian. And similarly, I probably have more in common culturally with Himanshu, who's an Indian, than a Pathan from the northwest frontier province of Pakistan, who's speaking Pashto, and it's got a whole different vibe going on. So there are a lot of similarities, even though the labels or the names by which we call these communities differ. But something that was just interesting to me is kind of like the environment. Like, so around a lot of the kind of brown faces, you see a lot of Somali kids, in Wembley, a lot of Polish kids. Whereas going to Queens is interesting. It's like, okay, you got a lot of South American kids, or that kind of thing, where you had a big Nepali influx at that time as well when I was there. So it's interesting. Or like the Guyanese thing, there's a big Indo-Caribbean community in New York. So just some of some of what's around those communities stuck out to me a lot more than actually differences between the communities themselves, which feel quite similar.
I'd say like a big difference is in America, because the immigration is more recent, there's less South Asians, and because the country is so spread out, there's less of these kind of enclaves, and there's more having to adapt to the mainstream. Whereas in England, there's more ability to adapt to the mainstream and kind of, become a part of the mainstream because of that more familiarity with brown faces, let's say. But there's also more ability to be more insular in communities in England because there's so many more South Asians. So like an enclave of South Asians in England feels a bit more like the communities in India themselves than an enclave in America, which is a bit more integrated and a bit more surrounded. There's parts of London I walk around where I feel like, oh, this could literally just be, a slightly more developed part of Bombay or Delhi. And in America, there's more. You have South Asians in places like Oklahoma and Iowa, whereas there's particularly South Asian neighborhoods in New Jersey and New York. But that's kind of it. And here there's more spread out enclaves, and there's just spread out people in a sense. So,
I love that. That's so true. That's bang on the money, I think.
Before you started work on music, how aware were you of both each other's kind of previous work, and was that the big attraction to getting together to make some music together?
Well, you know, I had liked a girl in New York who was British who had mentioned Riz's work, and so I was like, I got to check this guy out. And then I started hatching the plan to do a band with him, where I would just undermine him and upstage him the entire time. So it's been a long process, but
we got there in the end.
I'm finally there.
Funnily enough, that girl is now married, but still he's still waging this war against. Oh, she's not. Okay, that's why we're still doing this.
Yeah, okay, no, she's not.
But were you aware of Heems stuff?
I wasn't until he hit me up, and then when he hit me up, I kind of started looking into it, and I remember just kind of thinking it was just so wildly original and intelligent and clever and cool and funny, and it kind of definitely struck a chord with me. We both kind of like were making political music, shot through with a lot of humour.
Yeah, post 9/11 blues felt like it could have been a British equivalent of That's Racist in a sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question about post 9/11 blues? Because obviously that track was released roughly about
10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah. Obviously when you know, performing under your own name, Riz MC, and that track itself caused a bit of a stir, didn't it? And like 10 years on, what did it feel like at that time when people, you know, when you saw the reaction to the music that you were making?
On some level, just as a kind of new artist, to get any reaction for anything you've made, particularly it's your first track, just felt good. On another level, it just felt kind of confusing. It maybe the first time I realised that kind of what was going on in my head and the conversations that I was having with my friends and within my family were like very out of sync with what was considered to be the like acceptable national conversation. That felt weird. That felt like, you know, you a little bit kind of just out of sync with what's going on. I didn't think people would lose their shit over it so much. I mean,
when you saw people losing their shit over it, did you feel like completely bulletproof to any of that criticism, or did any of that like get to you, or how did you feel at the time?
Well, actually, you know, when I say lose their shit, I mean it kind of in a good way and a bad way.
Yeah.
You know, it was actually very encouraging to see that it had got a massive response. And most of it was good. Most of it was people kind of like reaching out to say, this is great, this is articulating something I've been thinking. So I felt mainly encouraged, and I guess what it did was, given that there was some controversy and there was some people saying this is wrong, unacceptable or whatever, you know, for that to happen quite publicly straight out the gate made me feel a little bit inoculated against you know, that kind of against that kind of criticism, or at least you know what, my benchmark for making anything is to expect that some people won't like it, so you kind of give up early on the idea of being able to please everyone.
Back to Cashmere, and obviously you'd made some music together previous towards before putting this album together, so what was the conversation that happened going into wanting to make this album? Did you have a kind of unified vision for it? Did you talk about it, or did you book some time, go into the studio and just let it happen?
Yeah, as you say, these guys put an EP out and seemed to get a great reaction. I thought there was so much potential in the band. For whatever reason, nothing was happening with it. So I was like, guys, let's do something with this. So I made a load of beats, and Riz was basically educating me in Kwali music, which really inspired me. And then I basically got together a palette of sounds and a vision in my mind. And so I made Tiger Hologram. The guys seemed to be into that. And then Heems happened to be in town one day, and that was the first time I met him. Came to my house, made a few demos, and that sort of just generated some momentum. And then a year later, fast forward to May this year, we'd sort of got a little deal set up, and that funded Heems to come back over here. Came to Riz's flat, and
so
we banged out the
sessions
album
in your flat?
Riz's flat, in 5 days.
Okay, just describe the scenario. Was it like a bit of a setup like this, in the sense it was like, let's just put some mics up in our place and do it like we did it?
It was, yeah. Like I said, we did the whole album in 5 days. We had to work very quickly because we didn't have much time. And yeah, it was pretty DIY, man. We just sat down in my lounge,
recording in a bedroom, living room was engineering and kind of writing and plotting, and then I was cooking in the kitchen and smoking on the patio.
someone had to be in a separate space at all times.
Yeah, we can't stand each other, so we like to be in different rooms.
Exactly.
This is making me anxious to be together this close right now, so yeah.
Well, I'm glad you're sitting across from me,
Yeah.
next to me.
Yeah.
So you notice how I'm in the middle between these two guys.
Yeah, that's something
In case
else.
one of them lunges. In case there's a lunge scenario, I have to jump in.
You can just provide the human barrier.
Exactly.
I feel threatened by the fact that they're both matching today.
It's just like orange
I
coordination.
feel like they're
going on
ganging
here.
up on me. But
But in a sense, yeah, that's a joke. But Red is often like in the middle of us, and even he was the one that really got us to like do the project, had the beats, had the glue that brings us together. Because we're different people. We love each other, but we're different people. And so
Different in what ways then? And then different in what scenarios?
I'm
when
just
you're
like a
recording the
really
record?
serious person, and Riz is like really laid back, I would say.
I just well, I think it's funny because we have had like quite similar experiences, and like our life stories are very similar in a way. So I feel like there's no one. I haven't really met anyone that can really understand the nuances of those experiences and that kind of code switching and kind of being educated out of the class that you were born into, and kind of trying to maintain all this stuff. I mean, you can listen to the album. I won't go on about it, but sometimes when Heems is talking, it's like it's a better version of a thought that I've tried to articulate before. It feels very nourishing, actually, and very rewarding and satisfying, because it's like I feel like you don't have to explain stuff. You know what I mean? It's like there's a tacit kind of understanding. But yeah, I mean, if we go back to what the differences are, I'm definitely a lot more chilled, laid back and cool, and Heems is a bit more uptight and bossy, I would say.
Is this what you witnessed? Is this true?
Yes, that is word for word true.
How does sarcasm work in Britain? Is it like
You have to press a button that makes a loud noise.
Is it the same?
The sarcasm
Between
alarm.
jokes.
Exactly. Make people
Well,
aware.
one way in which we were very different is Heems kind of records. It's really impressive. He just kind of, Tom would play the beat, and Heems would just he just got off a plane and he just went straight into the booth.
And you just wouldn't want to hear the beats before. That was something I think was
he doesn't
quite
plan. He's
unusual
very
for ours.
How long do you need to spend with a beat before you've basically got the groove and you're ready?
minute?
15 to 20 minutes to
That's
write it in my head.
nonsense. No, he's done that. I've seen him get in there.
5 to 10 minutes to
I've
write
seen
it in
him
my
get
head,
in
and
the
then
booth after listening to when you heard Tiger Hologram. You got into the booth after like
I just
25
freestyled
seconds.
That one wasn't really written in my head. That was just off the top.
Yeah.
But
So he's very impressive in being able to work like that. And Tom and I had really kind of creatively with our solo stuff worked ourselves up into a space where we were kind of in the opposite headspace. We were like really, Tom calls it analysis paralysis, and I had been kind of tweaking things to death. Like my English Than mixtape, which I put out in April 2016, I recorded in 2012. I just kept shelving it, and then went back and redid the vocals all again in 2013, then shelved it. And then, that's just, I just kind of sometimes get into this really obsessive perfectionist zone, which I think really isn't even anything to do with the music. It's some other deep-seated psychological.
Well, it's also like
I'm
retaking shots in film, right? It's like, let's do that again. How do you want it, and how should it be? And I think your way of recording is kind of similar to that.
It's also, you are a craftsman, you like to work on things, and that does quite often produce great results. But it's also, you're an amazing executor who you're capable of doing, delivering a line in such a variety of ways, for example.
I think it shows. I think your work is stronger on this album than mine because you put in that extra effort and do kind of go over the details.
The funny thing about this album is we were all forced to work in Heems' way and at Heems' pace, because we had 5 days to do this. And we're not going to get an album done in 5 days if I'm sitting down like writing one track a day, because that's where I've been at creatively. And so we had to work like Heems works on this. Me and Tom found it very liberating, and he actually put me back in touch with that side of myself, because I started off as a freestyle battle rapper. Jump Off, Battle Scars. I was champion. Jump Off, Battle Scars, Bombay Bronx.
Bombay Bronx?
Yeah, Nihao had a thing. Yeah, it was like a desi night.
That's a good name. That's better than Bourbon.
I remember I beat Pavan. Or if it's Volgatron, I beat Pavan in the finals.
Oh, damn,
from
really?
Foreign beggars.
Oh, I'm gonna talk to him about that. I'm gonna rub that in real nice.
So you got fond memories of those nights?
Yeah,
Those
man. I mean,
times?
they were fucking terrifying getting up there doing because that was back in the day before like Don't Flop and all that, when people wrote down their battle bars. You basically deliver a poem in front of a camera. This was freestyle. If it felt like it was written, people would do this gesture like, "No,
really?
it's written." People would boo you. So it was freestyle, and it was fucking intense. But that's how I made memes. So I could do that, but I had stopped doing that for whatever reason. I'd gone totally in the other direction. And Heems actually said, "Wait, didn't you used to freestyle?"
Yeah, aren't you like a battle rapper or something?
Yeah. And I was like, shit, maybe I am. And got back, and by the end of the album, he was writing and I was freestyling.
Yeah.
So it's been very rewarding creatively to reconnect with that as well.
When you listen to the record now, can you hear that sort of purity in it, in the sense that you didn't have much time, you did it very quickly, it was recorded in May, it's only October now, and it's out for most records that's not a very long gestation,
especially for rap records, because you have to clear stuff and deal with multiple producers. But that was where working with Red was another. That was like the 18th way. It was
we didn't have any samples to clear, and actually the one other reason for me, even after these guys left, we finished recording together, is I felt like there was a deadline, because originally we were trying to get it out on India and Pakistan Independence Day,
14th and 15th August.
So
respectively.
And trying to sort of count backwards from that date a few months to give it promo time and stuff. So I was like, shit, I need to mix this. And that's the sort of stage that usually I would definitely go into analysis paralysis, and you just go down a wormhole and you're tweaking an EQ knob and making a difference that not even you can hear.
So that's basically the overthinking, overcomplication. When we had John Hopkins on the podcast a while back, he was a really fascinating guest, but he had exactly the same thing, whereby it almost drove him insane though.
It does.
Because he couldn't sleep. He said that if I work on music too late at night,
it goes through your head. Honestly, it's a form of torture. It's really weird. It's like a jingle channel in your mind, and you have a song literally whilst you're sleeping is playing in your mind, so you can't escape from it. Riz, actually, he called me up a couple of times going, "I've got better lyrics. Can I come in and just redo them?" And I went, "No."
I did. He'd mix them, and I'd call him the next week. And
but you know what we did make an exception for was Ali Sethi, who sings on Aja.
Okay.
Everyone thinks it's a sample. He's a great singer from Pakistan, and we managed to get him, via the internet on the track real last minute before we went to mastering. So that was probably the only other thing we did, actually.
But it was great.
A week of recording, a week of mixing interludes and having him sing vocals, and then literally
artwork, basically.
Spent more on artwork and the album
so much
title than we did on the actual. Dealing with the one word of the album title was far more difficult than dealing with the 800 of the album itself.
What other names were in the offering for it?
We just couldn't decide between Customs or Cashmere as the album title, or our label name, and then or labeling the song after Half Mogul, Half Mowgli, which I feel like is probably one of the strongest tracks on the record. Probably because I'm not on it, I feel it's the best. But.
Well, probably actually because Tom directed the vocal arrangements on that in a very hands-on, detailed way, and that's something that I think was new for both of us, right? Like to work with a producer that's like, I don't know if you've had this, but often
Bossy.
I feel often like I don't know. It's often like rappers. I feel like often not treated as like if a producer's producing a singer, it's like no, wait, no, come in on the track like this. I want to hear you do. But I kind of feel like a lot of producers don't treat rappers like that.
I think a lot of rappers don't treat producers like that, unfortunately. You have rappers who don't write each producer's name on the album titles, and you have rappers who take it as a given that this producer will send me a beat, don't pay their producers, don't I'll make money selling the record, but don't do the math to actually see how much they sold and pay the producer on like a Bandcamp or something like this. And so it was about working with a producer for each track versus doing an album with 15 different producers where you're taking one beat from there. Tom's got a great ear, the musicality of it. It was really quick for me to figure out, all right, once I heard the third beat, I was like, damn, this dude is good. I wonder what he thinks I should do. And it was the first time I worked with a producer where I was like, you probably can't rap, but I'd be interested in knowing your opinion on how I should rap, because you know how it sounds.
Well, that's the beauty of actually working in the same room as people. So many things are done online now, and I think a couple of people have said the record does sound like it was recorded in a room, which is nice to hear, because so much recording now is just a patchwork of, you know, a million takes that perhaps have not even been done in the same room.
This is our Alvin Lucier cover album, Sitting in a Room. Is it Standing in a Room?
I don't know.
I don't know what that is.
It's an experimental music track. Actually, an old professor of mine, but he made a track where he walked around a room, and each time he repeats the same phrase, based on the sound waves of the room, it changes, and then by the end of it, it just turns into noise. And it's kind of the way that bats listen, I think.
This is our Batman. This is our Batman.
I didn't expect the last bit about bats.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
You don't think about bats every time you think about listening?
I only think about finishing.
Finishing me like talking, right? My bad, I'm done.
I wanted to ask about the reaction to the record. Because of what I do, I read a lot of reviews about a lot of albums. There seems to be a sort of theme coming out in the reaction to this record, and people, it seems to have been kind of very intensely personal. I've read a lot of really, really positive reviews about the album. The reviews that I've read around the record feel like it's really quite deeply spoken to people. So how have you found about the reaction?
It feels good. I mean, I often feel like the only person who truly understands me is Drake. You know, I mean, I feel like his reality and mine is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
You know, we have the same day-to-day problems.
Which Bentley to take
Which girl
out?
tonight? Which car tonight? You know,
Yeah.
this kind of thing. It's you know.
That's cool. There wasn't like a mission statement when we went into it of like, but it's really nice to make something that, you know, is in a sense personal. And the only way I can write or rap is personal, and then see how people relate to it is a really validating experience, you know?
Is the point that it's
has been very moving. Yeah, I do like Drake. I wasn't trying to be mean to Drake.
Yeah.
That's my role in this band.
Yeah,
You're here to be mean to Drake.
I'm pro Drake. Yeah, but no, it is. You know, it's a kind of lesson that I learned with this, and also with Englistan, was that the more specific you are, the more universal your work becomes, which is, of course, a really old cliche about the creative process. But you don't quite believe it, particularly if you come from a group that doesn't feel particularly visible in the art form that you're creating in. You just kind of have a sense that if you kind of go too personal, it'll just be too niche,
Well,
and
you
it
know,
won't resonate.
a lot of the writing on this record, about this record, I've noticed the bylines often have South Asian names. And you don't find that a lot in music journalism. There's a lot of South Asians writing about music, but
That's totally true.
this album has given a lot of young music writers, like perhaps, you know, a chance at their places of employment to write about something that for them is quite personal, you know?
Yeah, I think so. But even outside of just kind of connecting personally with South Asians, it seems to have connected quite personally with lots of people from all different backgrounds, specifically because of that. Like, you know, like on Half Mogul, Half Mowgli, we say our heroes were black rappers when we were growing up. And I couldn't relate to Tupac's day-to-day experience, but you can connect with the emotional honesty behind it and the feeling of being an outsider. And it seems like a lot of people connecting to this record on that level. And even if there are experiences they can't relate to, it's kind of opening their eyes to that. And then I think people like having their eyes open to kind of new experiences as well.
I mean, if you go to a Dead Prez concert, it's all white people. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah,
No.
yeah. I'm pro Dead Prez as well, just so we know.
I was like, even though it's music about essentially race and racism, like when I was doing Das Racist, we were making music in a sense that we felt like was very niche for like minorities who have gone to like these liberal arts type of schools and have a certain sense of humor, and then you go to the show and it's like 70% white people.
Right.
And so in a sense we were taking the piss on like white people, but the audience was all white. And that's my point on Dead Prez, or this album was made in a sense about South Asian experiences. But you know, the reaction to it hasn't been solely South Asian, but my point was just more that it's cool to give young writers at places like this a shot at writing about something that they would have a personal attachment to.
There was a quote from you, Riz, when you were talking about the track Zayn Malik, which I thought was particularly interesting, just given the point you made about your kind of, you know, role models growing up, where you said it's confusing for our youth about who we look up to, radicals or pop stars or neither, and just, you know, that's just an interesting thing in itself, I think. So,
where's the narrative that's empowering? You know, who's offering these kids dignity? Who's saying, I see you, I understand you, you belong here, you can aspire to this? and then I don't think this is just a problem for like young brown men in the ghettos of Europe, although that is a group whose alienation has been particularly focused on. It's something that this whole generation is dealing with, just feeling very cut out with quite a bleak future. I mean, Tom was out in Greece recently and he's saying like, it's a whole generation who are just, you got to accept you're not going to be as well off as your parents. It's not going to get better for you. It's going to be harder for you guys.
It's like that in the States as well right now, I'd say.
Yeah, everywhere really. So this idea of aspiration and role models is I think it's where are we offering people hope? Yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like this album is hopefully it does offer some hope or comfort to people, just that they are visible, and that no matter how marginalized or niche they feel they might be, how niche their placement is in the kind of supermarket, what shelf space they've been given way right at the back, in World Foods,
in the ethnic section.
Yeah, that actually that they have a place, and it's okay to embrace that. This is the album I wish existed when I was growing up.
When you were growing up then, in terms of your role models, was it you were taking different facets from different people to kind of like make up that role model, because there was nobody that effectively kind of like spoke to you as a complete experience?
Yeah, I think so. It was an amalgam. I mean, like, Bollywood is like, okay, cool, like heroic brown leading men, but that's not our experience. Tupac is like, okay, like, yeah.
I actually did turn to Bollywood. I know we have different opinions on this, but I did. The idea of seeing brown people being on a screen falling in love was extremely important for me, because coming perhaps from an arranged marriage, I didn't see that. So the idea of seeing it on film, the idea of, I'm a visual person, the idea of visualizing South Asians on a screen and looking at somebody that looked like me or a cousin was huge. So I'm barely immersed in Western cinema and very immersed in Indian cinema for that particular reason. And besides that, it was just basketball players and rappers, because that's what everyone in my hood was aspiring to be, Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
No,
what about you guys?
You said it, yeah. Yeah, well, no, it was for me, it was kind of like black rappers from America. And yeah, I mean, I think in the 90s we started having a bit of a cultural explosion, or, of kind of brown faces on TV and music. We had Prince Naseem Ahmed, we had Goodness Gracious Me, Bendy Like Beckham, Bally Sagoo went to #1. We had all this kind of stuff. I remember when Babylon Zoo went to #1 with Spaceman, Levi's ad. We were like, yo, he's Asian. What? That dude, he's Asian. Is he? That was his real name. Find out what his real name is.
Even though there's more South Asians in media, I still like to claim people. Be like, Charlie XCX is half Asian, right?
Yeah.
Kindness? He's half Asian, right?
Yeah.
Like, we're claiming him in the race draft. We want everybody to
race draft. And how do you feel about people kind of talking about it as a political record? Because presumably it's an experiential record. It's you guys telling stories about the stuff that you feel passionate about, rather than going out there deliberately to say this is a statement, this is a political record. Is that right in interpretation?
That is very empathic of you to say that, because I think, it just so happens that the day-to-day realities of certain groups of people, or really everyone in one way or another, is political. It's just that certain experiences aren't labelled in that way. It kind of come from a personal place. We didn't sit down and kind of craft or plot what statement we'd be making, other than just kind of talking about what's on our minds and talking about our day-to-day realities. Having said that, I think part of my day-to-day reality is thinking, what should I be saying? What kind of statement can I make? I don't know. This is kind of more like the scramble to think of something to say, rather than the thing that I, thought up to say. It feels like we're living at a critical juncture right now, in lots of ways politically, and politics is something on my mind. But I didn't set out to make a statement, really.
I like this idea of I didn't design it to be this way, but because of colonialism and slavery and imperialism, anything you do wearing the brown bodysuit, anything you do with melanin as a part of you is political. And so I don't turn to music for political statements. I'd rather read nonfiction for that. And but I do enjoy rap music. So when people put this political tag on us, I feel like it is also often the unspoken part is, well, those guys make rap about money and bitches and guns, and this rap is political, it's intelligent, and that I hate that. Like, I don't listen to rap if it's like under this tag of conscious or political. Like, that's not the rap that I really enjoy. So as much as it is definitely political, it is, but to me it's weird, rap music, and rap music is often political, and for this isn't any more political than other rap music. Perhaps it's more straightforward in its politicalness, but I don't see it as any different in a sense from other rap music, except for the musicality of it, which is more Asian infused. I don't think the topic matter is any different than a lot of the rap I listen to.
And it's true, in a way, it's like what all art is political, you know, it is.
All art by marginalized people is political.
No, but politics is like a way you look at the world, and it's a reflection of what you value. And like Downton Abbey is political in that it decides to focus on a certain very niche group of people, by the way, and yet it's like held up as a kind of default experience that we should all be able to project onto and relate to, and you know, and take on as our own. But why can't my super niche experience, which is probably less niche than, like, you know, being a lord of a country manor in the 1700s, why should that be less relatable than Downton Abbey? It's not. Downton Abbey is far less relatable if we're talking about, like, you know, most people's contemporary experience. So, but it's just like when you make art that is not coming from within the belly of the status quo, it is kind of given this kind of weird
people
tag
like to put it
political.
in a box so they could, like, you know, put it aside, essentially.
Yeah,
it's easier first you have to put it in a box so then you could brush it off.
Exactly.
And that's like, again, there's always one part of the process that we're privy to, and then the other process is often racism. You know, it's
do you think it's the same with instrumental music then?
Do you think so?
I think it depends on then what you label it, like how you categorize it, probably genre wise. Say if what you made was hip hop beats or something. Is that political?
How do you mean? Like, if people label it as hip hop beats, then what?
Well, if you make some music that you would describe as that,
I mean, you can argue anyway. You can argue that rap and production comes from neighborhoods where there weren't access to musical instruments, and so you had to take things that were around you and put them together to make a beat, and that in itself is political because it speaks to the lack of resources in those communities. So you could argue that,
yeah.
But do you want to?
No, not really.
If you call it political, you can put it in the back of the record store. You know, it's that psychologically in our culture, you put it in the back with the like weird foreign movies that have subtitles and world music, and you give it this like very like specific shelf space. It's not going to be at the front of the store in people's minds, and I just think that that's like it's again, I think it's a way of managing stuff as like weird and niche by calling it political.
It's also a way for people to relate to the record, considering the referendum and the election, right? So these are political times we're living in, and this falls into, so it's easily compartmentalized as part of this thing that's already in the air, you know? So it's not just compartmentalization in a sense to put it away. It's also, how do I relate to this? I'm not South Asian. Oh, but I understand the world that we're living in. And so then it becomes political in a sense, because, and it's not, I guess I was a little, you know, wrong to say that compartmentalization is always leading to kind of brushing things off in a sense. It's also, it's also to bring it closer. So my bad. Ignore everything I said before. If it makes you buy the album, we're very political. But if you like that type of shit,
if you're not into that, then it's really more of a dance party album.
Yeah, Drake.
Yeah.
Given what you've just mentioned there, it feels like the record slots into a very kind of like relevant scenario right now. What have been your kind of personal...
I was feeding into the Trump Brexit question for you.
Oh, okay.
I felt it coming. I saw it on the horizon.
Well,
so.
Go on then. That wasn't going to be my question. You can have it. We'll finish on that one. So your thoughts are...
All right, no. No way now. No way. No, sorry.
He's going to shut down now. Talk to me, Greg.
I'm gone. Riz and Tom will handle this. I gotta go.
Progression of Sweatshop Boys. Are you going to do some more stuff? Are you kind of like, do you have an appetite to do more stuff?
Tom, that's really all about Tom, because he's our Rick Rubin, really. Just dogs on his
He's our Zen guy.
I've made a load of beats for them already, and there's a big batch of them that has a theme. I don't know if we're discussing...
He's already mentioned the theme yesterday.
Oh, okay.
Did I?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I was
We don't have
about to say, are we talking about
Well, it's
that?
up to you. It's up to you.
Well, anyway, there's a theme, and I'm really excited about it. Again, in the same way I was excited about
A theme lyrically or musically?
Music.
Both,
May as well, we
both.
may as well say what it is at this point.
It's going to be such an anticlimax now that we've built it up.
We're moving around the diaspora in different areas, right? In the US, UK, India, Pakistan. Now there's an Indo-Caribbean community, and like I feel like in London and in Jamaica, Queens, there's this. You listen to rap, but you also listen to reggae. And for us in the diaspora, in addition to reggae, there's soca and chutney music. So we're kind of thinking about the next record in terms of soca, chutney, and like Guyana and Trinidad.
Well, there's a big
through the
Indian,
lens of,
Indo-Caribbean diaspora. Chutney music is kind of like the combination of Hindu bhajans and like soca and calypso. So it's very unique. I just think it's interesting the way new forms emerge, in new environments from the same gene pool.
Midnight Chats is a Loud and Quiet podcast. Production by Emma Snook. Music courtesy of Gold Panda. Search Midnight Chats on iTunes for more episodes and to subscribe. For more information, visit loudandquiet.com.